So good afternoon for those in our time zone, and for those that are not, such as Father Behr, good evening. It is a pleasure, a great pleasure to be with you today for this, the inaugural event for our recently launched Center for Patristics and Early Christianity. My name is, as you can see on the screen, Don Springer, and I'm one of the two co-directors for the center. And I'm not sure where all of you are, but I'm zooming in from just down the street from our host institution, McMaster Divinity College here in Hamilton, Ontario, Canada. And as I said, I know some of you are elsewhere, Vancouver and Ohio, and of course, Father John, all the way from Scotland. You can see his name on the screen, but even if you couldn't, you would probably be able to recognize him rather easily. The first time I met Father John, I also was able to pick up quite easily who he was, and he didn't even have his great black robes on. It was at SBL, and he was the only one that was about a foot taller than me and was in the section with the early Christian books. So it was pretty easy to locate you then as well. A little trickier on Zoom though. So we are very grateful to have you with us tonight, and grateful for each one of you that has joined us today. Our agenda for this session is fourfold. We will begin with a brief introduction of the center. Dr. Peyton and I will cast the vision for you, if you will, of what we envision, what we hope to see accomplished and through the activities of the center. Then we'll hand it over to Dr. Porter to tell you a little bit about McMaster Divinity College and its programs and how you might be able to plug in. Then Father Behr will share with us some general thoughts about the field, about the value of the study of early Christianity. And lastly, we will have a time of Q&A where you can pose questions about anything that has been presented. You can either raise your real hand, raise your Zoom hand, or you can write in to the chat some questions if you like. So any of those we will try to navigate. As I say, we will do that at the end. Before I hand it over to Dr. Peyton, again, I'm going to try to see if I can make this Zoom thing work here. So just in terms of a few introductions and showing you where people are on the screen, if I can make it work, let's see if, what do I want to use here? Pin or spotlight? How about spotlight? Is that right? So if I spotlight Father John, there you go. He'll obviously be sharing with us later. Again, you know, Reverend Dr. Behr at University of Aberdeen, how do you say that? Regius?
The Regius Chair of Humanity, not humanities, but humanity.
I was struggling on
coolest title.
Very good. Again, so great to have you. Then we have, of course, our president, Dr. Porter. As I mentioned, he'll be sharing with us in just a few moments. My partner in crime and co-director, Dr. Peyton. He will have the spotlight permanently here in a moment. Then we have also on faculty, Dr. Wendy Porter, specialist in early Christian worship and papyrology. Greetings, Wendy. And I saw Dr. Heath, there we go, our resident expert in early ecclesiastical history and empire and war matters, and my supervisor and good friend, Dr. Heath. And lastly, I did also want to introduce, where do things keep popping around on the screen? Where did you go, John? I could see your picture, but now you've disappeared. Oh, you're right at the top, right beside me. John Isaac also graduated from McMaster Divinity College, as I did, the year before me, I think. And John is our resident Syriac expert and a faculty fellow. Good afternoon, John. So those are our faculty and fellows that, again, I just wanted to briefly introduce you to. But at this time, I will hand it over to Dr. Payton, who will, again, share a little bit about the vision and the future for the center. Dr. Payton.
Thanks, Don. Yes, I'm Jim Payton, and since Don mentioned how he met Father John the first time, I will as well. I was the ecumenical representative from my denomination that went to the meeting held in Canada of the Orthodox Church in America, the Synod. And that was going to be the first time I would meet Father Behr. And I didn't know where to find him. So I went up to somebody at some kind of information desk and asked about him. He says, well, he's tall. He's wearing a cassock. He has a beard. I looked around and he said, that's not a whole lot of help, is it? I said, no, it's not. Most of the people there were tall, had a beard, and wore a cassock. But eventually I found him, and that was good. Yes, and we've been together at other events in the past as well. Let me tell you a little bit about what the center is about, what we have in mind for it. Our primary motive is to provide students greater opportunities for an immersive education in patristics and early Christianity. To give students to an opportunity to engage in what has become probably the hottest field in the last 20 years in historical theology within the evangelical world. For a long time, the study of patristics languished among historical theologians in the evangelical tradition. It just wasn't part of the package, but now there are a whole series of books that have been published, a number of monographs have been published. There are centers in North America and other places. But we wanted to participate in that and offer students an opportunity to engage with it and contribute to it. The Center for Patristics and Early Christianity seeks to serve that interest, though, in Canada. There is no evangelical institution, a seminary level, that offers a focus on and graduate degrees in patristics and early Christianity. So for Canadian students and international ones, that would include people from the United States, but around the world, we make this available to them. In a course I taught last year at a graduate level at patristics here at McMaster Divinity College, we'll refer to it as MDC. I had two students from Africa, one of Korean heritage who's lived here in North America for a while, and one from India. So we do have an international student body, and we make this available. We make our programs, including this one, in patristics and early Christianity, available to students from around the world. The field has much to offer students in stimulation, academically, for sure, theologically, much enrichment, perspectively as well. And as I'll mention soon, more in a minute, it has a lot to offer the contemporary church, so that this is, to be sure, an academic program designed for graduate studies that also is intended to serve well students in the professional degrees, preparing for ministry of various sorts in the church, whether ordained or not. What we want to do is, with this program, with the center, is create a hub for patristics here in Hamilton. Within an hour's drive of Hamilton, we have 7 universities. There's a large number of other scholars in various fields, some of them in patristics. Many university libraries are available. But we want to make the CPEC a hub for patristics in Hamilton, a community of students and scholars drawing on the wisdom of the ancient faith so as to be enriched by it and to enrich those around us in the church and in the academic communities of the Christian faith as well. Now, let me just mention that McMaster Divinity profs involved in this center have a variety of emphases and expertise related to its work. We have scholars who work in New Testament canon and papyrology, as has been mentioned. We offer a course in early patristic, basically focused on the 2nd century, Irenaeus of Lyon and Melito of Sardis, plus, of course, the apostolic fathers, the apologists, and so on. We can have courses in ancient worship, church and empire. We have a course upcoming in the handing on of the apostolic tradition and the adoption of the Apostles' Creed and Nicene Creed. We have treatment of Trinitarian and Christological controversies of antiquity, a focus on the Greek church fathers, Athanasius, the Cappadocians, and those of the later patristic era, Maximus the Confessor, and John of Damascus. So we try to make available expertise that would help students and get involved in these areas and contribute to their development. As was mentioned with John Isaac, we also have expertise in Syriac language, Syriac patristics, Syriac church history. That's an up and coming field in the discipline as more and more of the works of the Syriac church fathers get translated. It's a fascinating area, different from both the Latin and the Greek traditions that we know probably much better in the West. So there's a lot to offer interested students and other scholars as we hope to attract people to engage in conferences and participate in a variety of ways. We want to involve students in conferences as well. Don Springer will say more about this in a few minutes, but the idea is to help students engage in conferences here so that they are better prepared to engage as scholars in conferences in the learned communities in their field. And so that we can engage in sharing and discussion of what we're learning, scholarship in patristics and in early Christianity. We began offering at MDC courses in patristics 2 years ago, and in a few minutes after Don speaks, our president, Stan Porter, will speak on more about this and tell you more about what we offer at MDC. But we're now offering courses on early Christian concentration in several of our degree programs. And then finally, to let me wrap this up, what we desire with the center is our desire for our study of the early church to speak to the contemporary church. Our co-directors, Don and I, both have been pastors, and we know from our own experience that learning about this era from the church fathers and early Christianity has much to offer of practical, down-to-earth benefit for contemporary churches. Yes, there's very elaborate, sophisticated, scholarly work that can be done. There's an awful lot of interest in many evangelicals in the present day in finding out more about their roots. And I have yet to experience it, as somebody who's not a pastor anymore, but when I teach in churches, I have yet to experience it that people are yawning or ho-humming it when we start talking about the ancient church. There's an interest in learning about it and benefiting from it. So in the face of the general ennui, malaise sometimes among many Christians about where Christianity is and where the church is going right now in this post-Christian era, the study of patristics and early Christianity offers us all a reminder of what was seen to be essential or basic to the faith as proclaimed by the apostles, and to see what wasn't that important to them. And this helps us sort out how to live in the contemporary world as faithful followers of Christ. So for all of these reasons, both serving in the professional development of those who will be taking a Master of Divinity or Master of Theological Studies program and serving in church or Christian organizations or social work in some fashion, as well as those studying for an MA and PhD, we trust that this center will be of benefit to them. And we're thankful for you coming today to find out more about it and to ask questions. Thank you very much. Don, I'll turn it back to you.
Thank you, Dr. Payton. So just lastly, before we hand it on to Dr. Porter, in terms of some of the things that we've already begun, things that we're thinking about in the near future, I like to think a lot about the community, and Dr. Payton touched on that a little bit. As he said, we're trying to create a hub. And one of the things that has, well, I shouldn't say really surprised me, but a little bit is two things. Number one is I've reached out to scholars telling them what we would like to do. I've been quite overwhelmed by the positive reaction and the desire, especially perhaps amongst Protestants that don't have as many outlets as, perhaps Father Behr does, for example. A lot of enthusiasm for the project. Also surprised at the number of early Christian scholars, even right here in Hamilton. I'm really struck, not just by the four of us who have recently graduated from MDC, but there are many more than I expected. So there is the great opportunity to create a hub, as Jim said. but especially as the events and the programs and the heart of the center goes. For me, one of the real desires that I have is to very much be a center with two focuses. Number one, for students. We don't just want to be another institute or website that is telling everyone about the latest events. That's a very important thing to do, of course, but we don't just want to helicopter in great scholars, but we really desire to nurture students. And secondly, to reach out to the community and for all of these insights to hopefully have a practical impact and to really be an encouragement to the churches of our area. So in terms of events, again, we'll be looking at conferences and lecture series, but in the immediate future, we are partnering with us for a special session at the Canadian Patristics Society meetings in May in Toronto. So we're looking forward to that. A few of us will be there. We're also beginning to think about and have applied for funding for a graduate student conference in 2024. I'm hoping also to begin a reading group, in-person reading group on some aspect of the Fathers, getting into the texts next fall. And again, in addition to that, we have a number of irons in the fire. In this first stage of the process, as you can imagine, it's been about establishing the infrastructure so that we can actually have something to offer and to recruit students to join this community. And so that's a segue into our next part of the session as to what students can expect from a McMaster Divinity College education and the programs. I will hand it over to Dr. Porter to tell you a little bit about MDC and those programs. Dr. Porter.
Thank you, Don. Yeah, happy to talk a little bit about MDC. Don is going to be taking care of some PowerPoint slides, I think. So Don, if you can put those up and maybe you can manipulate those for me. First of all, welcome to everyone, and it's great to see everyone here. Some of you I already know, and others of you I don't know yet, but it's fantastic to have you joining us for this occasion, and we can talk a little bit about McMaster Divinity College. And this is based on a presentation that we have given at like ETS and SBL over the years. So first of all, we want to welcome you and hope that this will provide some information for those of you who are perhaps looking to be students, or for those who may be influencing students. If you know some students who are maybe going to look for study in patristic area, think of McMaster Divinity College. So Don, go ahead and move forward there. And we can tell you a little bit about McMaster Divinity College. And as Don said, we're located in Hamilton. Some of the things that distinguish us are, first of all, we have a world-class faculty. By seminary standards, we have a relatively large faculty. We have faculty who are widely published and well-known, and they give conference papers all over the world, publish in many excellent places to disseminate their work. We're very proud of our faculty. We think it's probably the strongest theological faculty in Canada. We have a holistic view of education, which means that we are concerned with developing the whole person. Jim was mentioning this. We're not just concerned with academics, but we're concerned with how academics can make a difference in the world and how they can make a difference in the church. And so we treat that holistically as a purpose. We also are concerned about the whole person as a student. So we try to give opportunities for students to develop in their knowledge, but also in the people that they are. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. We're also affordable. We have a large endowment by Canadian standards that allows us to be able to provide financial aid for all of our programs. And so we already have pretty low tuition fees. You'll see those. I'll talk about them in a minute. But with financial aid, it makes education very, very affordable at MDC. And we're also in a very excellent location. And Don and Jim were talking a little bit about this. We're located in the midst of a lot of universities, an hour from Toronto and a little and a little bit about an hour and a half from Buffalo. So there's two major airports, and it's really quite a beautiful and nice place. A couple of facts about McMaster Divinity College. Our roots go back to 1881. We don't have to go in the history of it, but we as an institution have actually traced our history back to that date. So we've been around a long time. And our governance model, the current governance model, goes back to 1957, when we separated from McMaster University, the university next door. And we're a freestanding seminary since 1957 with our own board, our own senate, our own faculty. Our endowment is valued at over $28 million. We believe it's the largest for private educational endowment for a Christian institution in Canada. It allows us to have endowed chairs and support for financial aid. And as a result, we have generous financial aid for all of our programs. And we have an annual enrollment of about 250 students, where there's about 35, 36 accredited seminaries and graduate schools in Canada. We're about the sixth largest. And we see ourselves as actually a seminary and a graduate school because we have traditional seminary programs, but also we have academic programs, including the MA and PhD. I'll say a little bit more about those in a minute. We educate men and women, so about 30%, a little bit higher than that, 33% or so of our students are female. And so men and women are welcome, and we want all to be better equipped to serve the church in whatever capacity. We are a Baptist seminary by our history, and we are associated with the Canadian Baptists of Ontario and Quebec, but we actually have over 35 denominations represented in our student body and a generous mix of denominations in our faculty as well. Just to give you an idea of where we are, some of you are at a distance, may not know the area. That's McMaster Divinity College. If you look at a map of North America, and we are located there in sort of that area of Canada that comes down a bit into the United States. So we're very close to Ohio, the state that was mentioned earlier. And there's a little bit of a joke. What is the country south of Detroit? And in fact, it's Canada, because we're in that part of Canada that goes down a little bit into the United States. More particularly, we are located, if the next slide will tell us, there you go. If he positions us in a couple of lakes, we're right next to Lake Ontario. So you can see that we're located then kind of between Toronto and the other side of the lake and Buffalo in New York, sort of northern New York and close to also Pennsylvania. The Hamilton area is a great area. McMaster Divinity College has the mission of developing effective evangelical Christian leaders for the church, academy, and society. So we take that very seriously. We're interested in educating people for the church, certainly to serve the church, also to serve the academy, and our graduate programs do that especially. And then we are also interested in serving society. So we take this mission statement very, very seriously in what we do and in all of our educational programs. So we have a philosophy of education that drives what we do. We begin with academic excellence, and we are known by reputation as being a place of academic excellence. If people know much about McMaster Divinity College, they know that we have this reputation for doing excellent degrees, having an excellent faculty, and demanding excellence from our students. But more than that, we build vocational practice into our degrees. And we have that, in fact, in especially our PhD program, where our students are expected to take what they're learning and then apply it in vocational context. So every student will learn how they can not only learn what they're doing, they learn their technical area of expertise, but be able to communicate it with others and be able then to be formed not only as academics, but as those who can serve their constituencies, whether that's in the church or in an educational institution. We have a mentor-based approach to our degrees, which means that even in the admissions process, a student will be working with somebody who will probably be their primary mentor, and that person will see them through their entire educational program. And a lot of hands-on work, close association, and mentoring goes on in our programs. We have a uniquely qualified faculty, and by that we mean that we hire our faculty members to be able to teach on both sides of the seminary and the graduate school divide. That means they are working with students who are being educated for ministry, but they'll also be working with students who are perhaps working towards teaching in the academy. We hire faculty members not to be isolated and specialized in one of those areas, but to be able to speak to both sides because we think they need to be speaking to each other. The things we learn are not just for us in an isolated ivory tower, but they need to have practical relevance to the church. And in our especially graduate programs, talking about our MA and PhD, we have formulated these degrees to sort of be a mix of what we think are the best in North American and in European, especially British education. So we have a strong coursework component, and we also have a very strong dissertation or thesis component. And we emphasize both of those so that you have a broad base established in your coursework, and then you have an area of real specialized expertise in your dissertation. The programs are designed so that they are intentional and they're sequenced. Sometimes programs have these kind of gaps where students can kind of fall through these gaps, finish coursework, and then not know quite what to do next, finish their comps, then be a little lost as they transition to their dissertation. But we've designed our programs to be very intentional, and they're sequenced, and they have overlapping components so that while people are working on their coursework, the students are also preparing for their comprehensive exams, getting oriented towards their dissertation subject. And then when they finish their coursework, they move to their comprehensives, and they've already established what they're going to do for the dissertation and then move seamlessly to that as well. Makes for a smoother time to get through the program. Our educational paradigm follows 3 rubrics. And those are knowing, being, and doing. We emphasize each one of those. Knowing, obviously, we emphasize academics. We have a great reputation for that. But there are many educational institutions that are excellent on the knowing part. But we also want to emphasize the being part. We want the knowledge that you're gaining, the educational experience, to be transforming who you are. And so it's changing you as a person, and ideally changing you into a person who is more Christ-like and following in the model of Jesus Christ and becoming transformed in his image. But also we want you to be a doing person. We want you to be a person who is equipped to serve the academy, to serve the church, to serve your fellow human beings in the things that you do. So we take the knowing, being, and doing paradigm very, very seriously. Now, concerning the programs that we offer, just to give you a little bit of an overview, we offer in our graduate school side the Doctor of Philosophy degree. And this is a program then that is supported by our MA, and we'll say a little bit more about some configurations of these, but these are our 2 academic research degrees. But then we also offer professional degrees, and the professional degree at the top is the Doctor of Practical Theology. And this is a degree that we have pioneered in North American education, and there are not many programs like this. And it's practice-led research for a professional degree. We also have your traditional seminary degrees, which would include a Master of Divinity, a 3-year Master of Divinity degree, and then a 2-year Master of Theological Studies degree also. And these are our major programs that we offer. We also have certificates, and these are little 6-course programs, and they're designed to support or supplement or add on to some of the programs that we do, especially in the professional area. Some people use those as a taster for seminary. Some do them as post-degree, as extra kinds of qualifications. So let's look a little bit at our PhD. It's our Doctor of Philosophy and Christian Theology. And it's designed as a degree to prepare students for a number of things, especially teaching and scholarship. You're probably very familiar with those, but also for leadership ministries in the church. And we have some students who come to do the PhD who have every intention of returning to the church or are already active in the church. and they've served the church, continue to serve the church, even though they have a doctorate of philosophy. We think it's a great thing. The church is not suffering from too much education, and so it's great to have educated clergy. The format of the PhD consists of the following. It's 2 years of research level coursework, and a student will do ideally two courses per term. So 4 in the first year, 4 in the second. Sometimes some people wonder, only 2 courses in a term? We refer to these as double courses. And so far, we've never received any complaints that our courses are too easy. And so before you think, oh, these are 2 just easy little courses, we demand a lot of our students. So they do 2 years of coursework, followed by a comprehensive exam set. And usually that consists of 3 written exams, followed by an oral exam. And then 2 years of writing a substantial dissertation that is a minimum of 80 to 100,000 words. And many of them go a little longer than that. We try not to get them too long, but they do go pretty long. They're thorough and involved studies. For our MA, Master of Arts in Christian Studies, we have really 2 configurations of this. It's designed to prepare students for a number of things. One of them is to continue with traditional doctoral level studies, of course. So many people move from the MA to the PhD, whether with us or someplace else. It's designed to give you competence in biblical, theological, ministry studies. You can concentrate in this is an academic MA. And so it's tailored to a particular area of serious theological study, biblical, theological, or ministry studies. Now, our traditional MA is a 2-year degree, and it has 1 year of coursework and then 1 year given to the thesis. But we're also introducing this year a fast-track MA PhD track. So a student coming with an undergraduate degree in Bible or theology would come in and do 1 year of coursework. And if they're successful in meeting the requirements there, they can then go directly into the PhD program and then do the PhD program and get 1 credit for 1 course that they've taken in the MA. That should basically shorten their program by at least 1 year. So we're looking forward to a number of people taking that degree. Our Doctor of Practical Theology is designed to prepare people for competence in an area of practice of ministry, and it's governed by practice-led research. Our students have a particular practice, and it's got a hybrid format that has 6 courses of practice-led research, and then some spiritual retreats, followed and consummated in a research dissertation project. This is our fastest growing degree at this point, and a lot of people are responding very positively to this degree. One of the things about MDC is that we provide a lot of other opportunities for our students. One of them is the area of publishing. We have MDC Press, which has an agreement with Whitman Stock Publishing, and so we have a number of series and journals that we publish, all refereed publications. And so they contribute to the academic world, but also the practical world. Our journal, McMaster Journal of Theology and Ministry, is a very well-known journal that serves the wider church. Besides this, we try to provide opportunities for our students to teach, and we provide this through our graduate assistantships. We make about 30 to 35 graduate assistantships available each year, and they're often tied in with the opportunity to teach courses, whether a course in a spring term or assisting a professor, all sorts of different opportunities. A Theological Research Seminar, or TRS, it's a bi-weekly meeting during our fall and winter terms where students present papers and then are questioned on those papers. It's a very lively environment, and it's good preparation for not just courses, but also for defending a thesis or a dissertation. We have guilds. So most of our areas of interest have guilds. There's a New Testament guild, there's an Old Testament guild, and we're looking forward probably to a Patristics Guild where people of common interest gather together regularly and talk about various things going on within their particular field. We also have centers, and so we have 3 centers. Most recent is our Center for Patristics, and you're finding out more about that today. We also have a Center for Biblical Linguistics, Translation, and Exegesis, and we have our Center for Church and Culture. And these are centers that have faculty members, fellows, and students who are interested in supporting these particular areas. We have other kinds of interest groups as well. And we will have, for example, a linguistic center or linguistic circle that meets, and people associate according to various sets of interest to talk about various topics, sometimes with visiting papers. Conferences, we try to sponsor at least one major conference at MDC every year, but also are involved in co-sponsoring other conferences with other organizations. Don mentioned one. It's going to go on at the center, at the Patristics group happening in the Learned Societies this year. And visiting professors. And we're open and would like to encourage and try to have visiting professors, whether it's through our centers as fellows or visiting for one-off lectures. We've had professors come for research leads as well.
Okay, sorry. Yes, so I was thinking about those things, like even today, you've got these that could be like Eddie
I think we've got some
accelerators, or sorry, like the Eddies.
We've got somebody on here. If they could mute their microphone, if you're with one of us, that would be great. Okay, so now we can proceed on the concentrations, just to give you a little bit of an idea of the areas where people can do their studies. The traditional areas that you can look at would be biblical areas. I think those, yeah, we have biblical, we have Old Testament, we have New Testament, we have Septuagint studies. You can concentrate in any of those. And in theological studies, you can concentrate in systematic theology, church history, or in patristics and early Christianity. And our third area is ministry studies. Many of you, of course, would be interested in theological studies, especially studying in patristics and early Christianity. A little bit about costs. One thing you have to keep in mind for those who are coming from outside Canada is the differential between the Canadian dollar and the US dollar. It's a very, very, very good exchange rate right now for those coming with US dollars. And so the immediate thing you get is a discount on your tuition to come for studies here. And we have actually fairly affordable costs. The PhD cost is, let me just put it up there, per year, $19,000, which is just under $14,000 US. And for 4 years, it would be the fee that's there. Our MA is on a per year basis, and that's at $98.50, which is a little over $7,000 US. So for the program, $14,000. And I realize that for some institutions, some of these costs are much, much lower than you'd expect. We'll talk about financial aid in a minute, but then there's also our combined fast track MA PhD, where you study for your first year at the MA rate and then transfer to the PhD. So this should give you a little bit of an idea of the tuition costs in these programs. As I said, the exchange rate shows that one of your first discounts is around 25% on the sticker price if you come from outside Canada. As far as financial aid goes, we have a wide range of financial aid. For the PhD, we have need-based bursaries, $5,000 to $6,000 a year, merit scholarships up to $6,000 a year. And all of our PhD students are encouraged to apply to become graduate assistants, and that can earn an additional $4,500 per year. And our DPT and MA programs, the professional degrees, are also given financial aid, usually up to somewhere around a third of the tuition costs. So that makes the degrees very, very affordable. We're very proud of our PhD placement rate. Not all institutions can make this claim. Over 90% of our PhD graduates have found jobs in their vocation of choice, and over 80% of them have full-time positions. And I know there's a lot of concern about getting jobs, but our graduates have been doing very well that way. If you're interested in more information about MDC, you can check our website there, or be in contact with any of us who are here on this Zoom call, or just make contact with Sarah Fuselier. Sarah's on this Zoom call as well. She's our director for admissions and recruiting, and she'd be happy to talk with you more as well. So thank you for your attention.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Porter. That got a little stressful trying to do slides and find muting and sort out issues there, but we made it through. So thank you for everyone's rapt attention. Again, if you have any questions, you can ask them later, write in a chat. A few of us, myself included, and John, Isaac, And I don't know if Sid is here as well. Oh, yeah, there's Sid. A few of us have gone through the program. And so if you have any specific questions, we'd be happy to help you there as well. But without delaying too much longer, I will, with great excitement, introduce again Dr. Reverend Father Behr, who is going to share with us, again, just a few insights about the study of patristics. He's been doing it now for a quarter century here, Father John. And so we're very
Slightly
excited.
more now.
Oh, dear.
Slightly more, I think even three and a half decades even.
All right.
Okay.
Well, you have the floor, please.
Okay. So thank you very much for this opportunity. And what I want to do is I'm going to make 4 points with regard to studying early Christian figures. And I think they're going to pick up on a point that Jim was making when he was talking about the importance of getting back to that early period to understanding what the core message is, and especially in our world today, and various points regarding that. So the first point I want to make is actually a sentence Rowan Williams writes in his book called On Christian Theology, where he says, Christian theology is perennially tempted to forget how it learned how to speak. Really as simple as that. Christian theology is perennially tempted to forget how it learned how to speak. And what he means is we've inherited a whole load of discourse, and really, if you look back at Christian theology in the 20th century, it has fragmented into all these different subdisciplines. So that you've got, scriptural study, Old Testament, New Testament doing its own thing. You've got systematic theology, which barely touches scripture, apart from maybe occasionally, bringing up a quotation here and there. You've got liturgy doing something different, or worship doing something different. It's completely fragmented into all of that. And the inner coherence of all of it has been lost. We've forgotten how it learned how to speak. New Testament studies has moved on a great deal since the kind of thing that was being done during the majority of the 20th century, focused on historical critical study. It's gone on way beyond that, and it has now been, over the last couple of decades, turning more and more towards early Christianity to understand the reception of the scriptures in the early church and how scripture was being read, and working towards that. But it's kind of moving out in its own field rather than really engaging with what patristic scholars have been doing. But it also goes for historical theology. Almost invariably, historical theology over the course of the 20th century has been pursued as the history of doctrine. Okay? So one of the books I had to really read and digest when I was doing my doctoral work was this book, The Search for the Christian Doctrine of God. I can see a few figures nodding their heads. 800-page work on the Trinitarian theology of the 4th century, literally 850 pages. And it was cutting-edge work at the time when I was doing my doctoral work in the 90s. His conclusion, by the time he gets to page 840, is that he says, the Trinitarian theology developed in the 4th century, and I'm quoting him, I'm going to show you another quotation in a minute. He says, was the, and he italicizes the solution to the intellectual problem that had been vexing the church for so long. Okay? So he's approaching it in terms of an intellectual problem, the doctrine of the Trinity, the 4th century is a solution to it. And then he carries on. I'm going to post this quotation in the chat, because I think it really exemplifies what I want to say. So if you look at your chat, I'm going to read through it. This page 848 to 849. He says, the expounders of the text of the Bible, he's meaning Athanasius, the Cappadocians, and so on, are incompetent and ill-prepared to expound it. This applies as much to the wooden and unimaginative approach of the Arians as it does to the fixed determination of their opponents to read the doctrine into the Bible by hook or crook. So they simply got it wrong. And then he carries on. It was much more the presuppositions with which they approached the biblical text that clouded their perceptions. The tendency to treat the Bible in an atomic way, as if each verse or set of verses was capable of giving direct information about Christian doctrine apart from its context, the oracular concept of the nature of the Bible, the incapacity, with a few exceptions, to take serious account of the backgrounds and circumstances of the writers, the very reverence with which they honored the Bible as a sacred book stood in their way of understanding it. In this matter, they were, of course, only reproducing the presuppositions of all Christians before them, of the writers of the New Testament itself, of the tradition of rabbinic piety and Jewish scholarship. It really is the most amazing quotation I've ever come across as a conclusion to a 900-page book on the Trinitarian theology of the 4th century. Trinitarian theology of the 4th century was the solution to the intellectual problem, but the people who were expounding it had absolutely no idea how to read the Bible properly. The way they were reading it is simply wrong, even if the way they're reading it goes back to the apostles, all Christians before them, and in fact going back to the Jewish tradition as well. It's the most staggering example of the split, not just between scriptural studies and systematic theology, but the split within historical theology between what we think people are saying and how they're actually saying it. Yeah, so they're exegeting scripture, he says, completely wrongly, yet they managed to develop the doctrine of the Trinity. And we could take the doctrine of the Trinity that they developed out of the way in which they said it, the context in which they said it, and treat it completely independently, because we know how to read scripture better, and we can put them together in a way which I think doesn't fit. Okay, so my first point is Rowan Williams' point. Christian theology is perennially tempted to forget how it learned how to speak. The second point I'd want to make might sound to be kind of opposed to that point, but actually it's something I really became aware of as I was working through the different texts, translations, editions, and so on, and then finally came to an intellectual historian called Quinton Skinner, who writes on early modern political philosophy. And he wrote some really interesting material on the discipline of the history of ideas. And he really blasts it and tears it apart, the history of ideas. And he develops various, what he calls methodological fallacies. And I think that the quotation from Hansen really exemplifies it. The methodological fallacy in this case is what he calls the mythology of doctrine. Okay, the mythology of doctrine. Now, he's an early political philosopher. He's not talking about Bultmann and mythology and doctrine, whatever else it might be. What he means by the mythology of doctrine, if I'm frozen.
You are frozen, but we can still hear you. Oh. Uh-oh. That's not good. That's a nice screenshot, but oh dear. Well, hopefully we can get Father Behr back. Don't know what happened to him there. Well, hopefully he can pop back in, and I'll keep my eyes open for the admittance room there. As we await his return, as I mentioned off the top, we do want to give an opportunity for Q&A. And I half suspected that much of the potential questions, if there was going to be any, would be for Father Behr. But in advance of his return, if anyone has any questions about the center itself or the programs, to be directed towards either Dr. Porter or myself, Dr. Payton, or the other faculty that I mentioned, we might as well take the opportunity we have now to do that. And of course, you know how it works. We'll just start getting going on some questions, and Dr. Behr will reappear. But we can't assume that. So does anyone have any questions at all that I can answer? Don't try to ask any of us questions specific to Father John, because I will fail. But about the center or the program, the opportunities, the finances, the activities, You can either write it in the chat or ask away. Anyone at all? Help me out here as we wait for Dr. Behr. Any questions at all? You'll notice that we have talked about the different.
There's one question there, Don.
Dr.
A couple
Loopstra has a
questions.
question.
Oh, I guess I should look for those little hands there. Yes, Dr. Loopstra, welcome.
Hi, thanks. Oh, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, thanks so much for the presentation. I'm up the street over at Redeemer.
Right.
And as somebody who might send students there, thinking about that, what's the relationship between the programs at the Divinity School and the programs across the street at the university in terms of the other Department of History, Religion, et cetera?
Right. Dr. Porter?
Yeah, they're separate. We are not linked to them. And so they're separate programs. They have their own religious studies department at the university where they have their own faculty and teach their own programs. And we have our own faculty and teach our own programs. I think we're probably, last time I looked, probably a little bit larger as far as numbers of PhD students and all than that department. We've not had much tie to the history department. In the past, we've had occasional personal ties to them, but it's not a joint program and it's not a linked program in any way.
Okay, I'm sorry about that. I don't know what happened. Well, apart from the fact that it froze. I had to reboot, and I'm back on now, and it should
No
be fine.
problem. We took one quick question while you had stepped out, and
Okay, so I'm going to pick up where I think I left off. When I noticed everything had gone frozen. So I've been speaking about Hansen, yeah, and I think that was still on, yeah.
you were on mythology of doctrine.
Knowledge of doctrine, yeah. So he's not talking about Bultmann and doctrine as mythology. He's talking about the idea that we have that every particular discipline is constituted by key doctrines. And that our task is to look back to see what each particular figure might have said about these doctrines. So he was looking back to the 4th century to do Trinitarian theology. Other people looked to the 5th century to look at Christology. Or we might go back to Irenaeus to see what he said about the Trinity and all of those kind of things. Whereas in fact, Irenaeus wasn't doing that. He simply wasn't doing it. He wasn't thinking that he had all of these doctrines which he's got to tackle. Yeah. So when we treat it like that, when we read these particular figures with a whole configuration or a whole system in our mind, and we want to know what they say about these things, we're in fact not reading them. Just very straightforwardly, we are not reading them. So bear in mind that idea of mythology of doctrine. The classic example for that, this is what really pushed me into thinking that way, was when I was translating Athanasius on the Incarnation. You know, the first work called On the Incarnation, written by the great Athanasius. And he's not talking about what we talk about when we use the word incarnation. He doesn't even mention Mary. He doesn't mention the birth of Jesus from Mary. He's talking about how Jesus died on the cross and how he is therefore the Word of God and all of those kind of things. So Hansen says he's got a really poor understanding of incarnation, but that's a whole other picture. Because he's not talking about what Hansen thinks he should be talking about. Okay, that leads me on to my third point, which is that, in my opinion, this is really what makes the discipline of patristics, early Christian studies, both the most challenging of all the different disciplines and the most liberating. Really the most challenging, most liberating, and in that sense, the most constructive. What we're doing when we're reading Irenaeus or Origen or Clement or whoever it might be, is to try as best we can, on the basis of their texts, to see how they saw things, not what they might tell us about what question we want to do, but how they saw things. And like C.S. Lewis points out in his introduction to Athanasius on the Incarnation, reading these classic texts is like a breath of fresh air. It takes you out of your way of seeing things to see things in a different way. And more often than not, the kind of issues and problems we think we've got within theology, as we currently think about it, are problems which emerge within a particular configuration. And if you try and do, in my opinion, systematic constructive theology within that configuration, you're not going to be able to get beyond it. So to think outside of your own historical horizons requires a challenge of looking at a different historical horizon, or seeing things from a perspective within a different historical horizon, especially someone like Irenaeus, Origen, the early figures, where we see that discourse of Christian theology really coming together in all of that. So I think it's the most creative way, creative field, the most challenging, no doubt about it, and also the most creative. Then the final point I'd want to make, and this is how I differentiate how I would approach studying historical theology today compared to how it was done, say, again, the mid-20th century, is that in the mid-20th century, it was done under the rubric of synthesis. Yeah, reading all these different figures, putting it all together, and lo and behold, they all say the same thing. Fine. And it's what they say is what you already knew. Fine. Yeah. So you look to the Cappadocians, 4th century, for Trinitarian theology, you look to Cyril or Maximus for Christology, you look for these different figures to fit into your blueprint, and lo and behold, they all teach the same thing. Rather than synthesis, I would urge the idea of symphony. And the point about a symphony is that it's polyphonic, many different voices, and it's both synchronically and diachronically polyphonous. Yeah, they're different voices at any given time. Basil has got a very different voice than Gregory of Nyssa, no doubt about it. But if you just reduce them to, this is the Cappadocians, and this is what they say about the Trinity, you're not listening to either of them. Yeah, Irenaeus has got a very different voice than Maximus, no doubt about it. They're writing in different times, in different contexts. They're all figures giving expression to their faith in their historical context, and you want to hear each one of them in their distinctiveness. And then the point of thinking of it like that is that if we want to take part in a symphony, we have to read the score of the previous movements. And in reading the score of the previous movements, we become harmonized to the symphony so that we can sing our part today, which is not merely a repetition of what went before, may even sound quite different than what went before, but is part of the continuous symphony. Yeah. Then the final task, and that's a much more tricky one, will be how to hear all of these different voices as symphony rather than cacophony. Yeah. Well, my brief answer to that would be the way to do it is not by resorting to a dogmatic system of synthesis and try to show that they're all teaching the same thing, but rather to understand all of them as expressing their faith in the crucified and risen Lord as proclaimed by the apostles in accordance with the scripture in their particular time, building on those who've gone before, responding to those they're needing to respond to in the present. So the symphony doesn't lie in my reconstruction, but actually what makes it symphonic is a crucified and risen Lord proclaimed in accordance with the scriptures. Okay, so those are the 4 points I'd want to make to bear in mind when thinking about what we're doing when we're doing historical theology.
Wonderful. Thank you so very much. It's amazing how stimulating you can be in only a few brief moments and with internet breakdowns. Thank you very much. I'll invite others if they want to write in any questions, or this time I'll pay attention to the little hands in the corners. But you've touched on something that I've heard from other scholars as I've told them about what we would like to do here with the center, as I've sought their input about what they think that a Protestant evangelical center should think about. And they touched on something you really covered there. They said that, as Dr. Payton mentioned, And as you well know, patristics really has taken off amongst Protestants, the evangelicals, the last 20 or 30 years. But a number of those that I have spoken with issued a bit of a warning, very much connected to what you were just saying, that we have to be careful that we are not promoting and educating students to do exactly what you warned us not to, and that is to co-opt the fathers to try to push our own agenda. There has been a fair amount of literature that, you know, tries to celebrate a great consensus, and evangelicals have, you know, really been clinging to that. So I guess my question is, what are some of the ways that you have found successful as you interact with students to, again, trying to get out of their own horizon, as you said, and teaching them to read and to listen?
Very simply, read. reading text together. Do not be satisfied at all with textbooks or handbooks with quotations from it or excerpts from it. Absolutely don't. You know, Athanasius, Basil, Gregory, Irenaeus, they didn't write excerpts. Yes, as simple as that. They didn't write excerpts. So to simply take those paragraphs out and say, okay, here's a couple of paragraphs on what Irenaeus says about Trinity. Here's a couple of paragraphs what he says about Christology. You're not reading him. You've got to learn to read the whole text. Start with the shorter ones. If you're going to do Irenaeus, okay, maybe jump a bit in book 1 and book 2 when he's going over all the different Gnostics and Valentinians and whatever. That's okay, fine. But learn to follow learn to follow the text train of thought, how it's using words, how that text itself is working. Yeah, because texts work. They're highly rhetorical pieces. You know, we may not write like that in today. We just write in a much more straightforwardly prosaic academic way where we establish an argument. But they're orators. They're entertainers. Yeah. You know, just came out a couple of weeks ago, Gregory of Nyssa, his work on the making of man, yeah, or really it should be called on the human image of God. He actually says, and nobody's really paid attention to it, in chapter 16, he's asking a question, you know, if God wanted to make a human being, why did he make males and females, and what's going on with all of that? And he then says, I'm not going to tell you what comes to my mind. I'm going to offer some fantasies and guesses as an exercise for you to work on. Yeah. And then he's playing with the reader for 3 or 4 chapters before he comes back to say, so what's going on with all of that? Yeah. So read the text as whole and learn to really enjoy being in their company. Yeah. And it takes time. It really takes time. I did my doctoral work on Irenaeus some 30 years ago, and I think I'm beginning to understand him. But we'll get there.
We'll get there.
We'll get there, yeah.
Very good. I do want to ask if there's any questions specific for Father John, as it is almost 9:45 for him. So we will, if there's other questions about the program, we'll just pause those, and then we'll enable Father John to exit if need be. So, we have a couple of hands here. Okay, so Jonathan, why don't you go first if you unmute yourself there. Oh, there you go.
Yes, thank you. Just more a general question. And it's based off something that Dr. Payton said about how patristics can inform our living in the modern world. And I just wanted to pose this question to you, Dr. Behr, like, how do you think studying the church fathers in their context of the 2nd and 3rd century can relate to our modern 21st century context?
I think absolutely, fundamentally and radically and profoundly, because it challenges our assumptions, which we wouldn't have challenged if we just stayed within it, and helps us to see things differently. So one of the things I've been most fascinated with in the work I've done over the last 20 or so years is a question about what it is to be human. Yeah. So Ignatius of Antioch, when he, sorry, where'd you go? Oh, you're over there now. So you switched place on the screen. Ignatius of Antioch, being taken from Antioch to Rome to be martyred, he writes a letter to the Christians in Rome saying, whatever you do, don't interfere with my coming martyrdom. And then he says, the pangs of birth are upon me. Hinder me not from living. Do not wish me to die. Allow me to come to the light. When I will have arrived there, I will be a human being. He's not yet born. He's not yet living. He's not yet human. He'll only become a human being by taking up the cross, following Christ in his passion. Now, what's going on with that? Yeah, that really dramatically challenges the question about what it is to be human. How Christ is human when he says on the cross, tetelestai, in my book on the Gospel of John, I argue that that's a direct following on from the Gospel of, from the opening chapter of Genesis. God speaks everything into existence and says, let it be, let us make a human being. Tetelestai, it's finished upon the cross. Here finally is the human being who's an image of the living God, of the invisible God. Yeah. So when Ignatius says, let me go to my martyrdom and I will become a human being. Life and death have been reversed. Death has been taken up, turned into the means of life, and in fact, the way of becoming a human being. Okay. Now, if that doesn't challenge, I'm not sure what will. And if that doesn't respond, and I think it responds really profoundly to questions about life, death, human, and also what sexuality is doing in all of that. And I speak all the time about that all over the world. And yeah. So that's one example.
Thank you.
But
Yeah.
if you think that by, say, going back to Irenaeus, you'll find a new understanding of the Trinity or whatever else it might be, you are still remaining within the categories that you've inherited, which he's not thinking in. So you've really got to let your mind be challenged. Yeah, you know, if I want to be really provocative, and, you know, Don, other people know me and I like being provocative, I think it's taken me 30 years of living in the 2nd century to be able to think Christian theology without those separate doctrines, Trinity, incarnation, ecclesiology, Mariology, whatever, all the different things, because they thought of it without those doctrines. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. No, thank you. And like you referenced your book on John, I've read only a bit of it, but I've really enjoyed it so far.
Yeah. So the going back and reading Irenaeus and other figures like that, who are not thinking of a system as we've come to systematize it. Yeah, they're not thinking, oh, how am I going to treat the Trinity? How am I going to treat incarnation? They're not working in those kind of ways. Allows you to think of Christian theology in a way that isn't burdened by the mythology of doctrines in Skinner's sense. Now, I don't think you're able to do that if you just work within the systematic field. Because within the systematic field, your field is defined by those doctrines. Okay.
Okay, thank you. Hosea, do you have a question for Father Behr?
Yes, thank you so much, Father Behr. I mean, you actually answered a little bit of my question, but I do want to still ask you on the how to have that, I guess. So what I've noticed while I've been reading the Fathers was that I noticed that presupposition and framework that I have inherited, and it was really difficult to not thinking that. And I've also seen other people, my friends who are studying with me, read the same text and get wildly different understandings out of it. So how do you unlearn, in a sense? Like, is that a spiritual practice? Is this, and as you said, is this just time, or what is
it's all of that. It's all of that. I would actually really say that reading patristic texts is a spiritual practice, but it takes time, because you've got to really, you know, work at it. You know, students I've had will talk about going through a class with me as learning to grapple with a text. Yeah, you've got to keep on asking questions. Why does he say this? Why does he put it that way round? Yeah. Why has he put the sentence in this kind of construction? Really down to that. And then if you really want to do it seriously, you've got to learn the ancient languages. Yes. If you want to read Irenaeus, you've got to know Latin and Armenian. Yeah. So it takes time, significant time, and patience. Yeah. And then one thing, you said other people read it and come up with the same, with wildly different interpretation. Yeah. Well, the text does remain the text, and so you've got to keep on working at it. Yeah.
Okay. Matt.
Yeah, thank you. First off, thank you, Father Behr, for joining us. And your book on the mystery of Christ, life and death I read it 6 months ago, and I'm still trying to sink my teeth into it. So thank you for that work. A question that I do have.
That's fine.
Yeah, that's fair. A question that I do have is, you've been studying the patristics now for 35 years. What's one area within scholarship of patristics that you're very excited about, that encourages you? And then are there any methodologies or practices that, if you could snap your fingers, you would get rid of them at this point of how we come to the patristic text and study these fathers and mothers?
So the first question was again?
What's something that's excited you?
What I find really exciting is the way that a good number of New Testament scholars are moving towards the kind of early reception, early Christian readings of Scripture. I'm thinking especially of Richard Hayes and people like that in their work reading backwards. That kind of thing, where they're really. So there's kind of a convergence that's going on there, yeah? So from the time of Hansen, with that quotation, the fathers were great theologians, but they're hopeless exegetes. Well, no, more recently, we're taking seriously how their theology and exegesis are of a piece together, and it's a very particular discipline of reading Scripture in a very particular way, but it's one that a good number of serious New Testament scholars are also coming into dialogue with and arriving there from their own journey. I find that really exciting. I've yet to see the same kind of thing happening in systematic theology. Yeah, I don't. Yeah, I find it really hard to engage with modern systematic theology. If I'm going to engage with anything, it tends to be more modern philosophy. Derrida on death or whatever else it might be. Michel Henry especially. And with regard to your second question was about discipline of reading, was it something like that? Yeah.
Yeah. Are there any methodologies within patristic studies that you don't think are helpful or are not useful at this time?
The only thing which is really helpful is learning the ancient languages. Just go for it. Yeah, you need, if you want to do it seriously, you need Greek, Latin, Armenian, Syriac at least to do this. Yeah, because only when you do that are you actually really engaging with the text itself. So my engagement with the different figures, I did my doctoral work on Irenaeus and Clement some 30 years ago. Then I started translating. I translated Irenaeus's demonstration. And then the next one I did was Athanasius on the Incarnation. And I found the discipline of translating was phenomenal, because you have to pay attention to every word and how it's used across the whole of the text. Yeah, so it's not just, it's completely different than reading it in English. You have to know how, even the word and or if or whatever else, how it's used across the whole of the text. Yeah. So that discipline of translating, because it takes time as well. You can't just sit down, like you can sit down and read on the Incarnation, I know, in an hour, 2 hours, whatever it might be. But to sit down and translate it and to pay attention to the word across the whole of the text, that takes serious amount of time. Yeah. And then doing a critical edition takes you one step further, because then not only do you know the word across the whole of the text, but you know the different readings and different manuscripts that are witnesses to the text across the whole of it. And that takes you to a further level. And as you're patiently working through all of that, you really start to get a feel for how the writer's thinking, how they're writing, yeah, how they're putting their thoughts into words, yeah. So rather than thinking of methodologies and, reading the latest critical methodology and so on, no, spend your time learning languages. Much, much better. Okay? I did mention Quentin Skinner. There is a nice, so if you want to read something on methodology, there's a really nice book of his. It's volume 1. It's called Visions of Politics, volume 1. And it's got a number of essays about the methodology of history of ideas and methodological fallacies and authorial intent and a whole bunch of really interesting things going on. But I came to that after working through these texts myself. Yeah, so it wasn't that I read his work and then said, oh, now I've got the right methodology, let's now read the text. No, you've got to read the text. Yeah. Okay.
Wonderful. Brendan.
Hi, Father John.
Hey, Brendan.
How are you? I was thinking about you talking about bringing, adding our voice to the symphony. So I'm thinking about the fact that we do kind of live in a world, especially maybe in Protestant evangelical theology, where these categories of Trinity, soteriology just are the language of the field. Are there any ways in which, and I think I know what you're gonna say here, but are there any ways that we can heuristically use those categories as long as we're responsibly saying Athanasius is not thinking this way, but he does still contribute to the
I had this discussion with a group of students the other day in class, and I just wondered out loud, the word Trinity has got a whole load of baggage for us. Yeah, it just has centuries of what we think Trinitarian theology, and then we automatically think Trinity, the mystery of the one and the three, and all of that kind of stuff. Now, how would it be if you translated Athanasius or Basil, instead of translating trias as Trinity, just translated it as three? What effect would that have? Literally, what effect would that have?
Yeah, it would challenge and disrupt.
It would totally, but that's what the Greek word is. So if you say, do you believe in the Trinity? Do you believe in the three? Yeah, both of those are absolutely valid translations of trias. Yeah, in Greek. Okay, in fact, I'd say, do you believe in the three is a much more adequate translation, precisely because it doesn't have the baggage that we now have with the word Trinity over 1500 years since. Yeah, so there you go. There's one example. Another example like that is, again, very much like that with regard to translation. I'm becoming ever more sensitive, after doing the work in the Gospel of John, becoming ever more sensitive to the way in which different words are all translated as incarnation. Yeah, so especially Athanasius, especially Maximus, he uses three different words. He uses sarkosis or ensarkosis. He uses ensomatosis, and he uses enanthropisis. Okay, we just translate them all as incarnation. Well, no, they're not. So I'm experimenting for myself, reading them as infleshing, embodiment, inhumanization. Yeah, very different words. And, when you read them like that, and then you start to make other kinds of associations, maybe there's something quite else going on in it.
Yeah, I'm thinking, so I guess the danger I feel in my heart is the danger of repristinating what they said for ourselves and just saying, let's just talk like them. Instead
no,
of
but no. It's not.
I'm thinking of.
No, it's not. I wouldn't say it's so much doing that, but we're not even learning to think like them unless we actually pay attention to the words they use.
Yeah.
On the one hand, yeah. But just to show you the dangers of the baggage of all of that, I think some of you might have heard this anecdote before about my son at Fordham Prep School. When we were living in New York, my son went to Fordham Prep, nice Jesuit Catholic school. When he was in high school, one day one of the teachers came in and said, "Okay, boys, today we're going to explore why we say the one God is a Trinity." Okay. My son, age of 14, put his hand up and said, "I don't, sir." The Jesuit professor knowing he's my son, turned to him and said, "Felix, what do you mean?" And apparently Felix then turned to the professor and said, "Well, I don't know about you, sir, but I follow the Nicene Creed." Not I believe in one God, the Trinity. I believe in one God, the Father, and one Lord Jesus Christ, who's Son of God. Yeah. So if you say the one God's a Trinity and you say that Jesus Christ is Son of God, does that mean he's a son of the Trinity? Obviously not. That just shows what kind of chaos you get into if you don't pay attention to language. Okay. So I'd be disruptive.
Yeah, that's helpful. Thank you.
And I think it's really helpful to be disruptive like that. And I wouldn't be disruptive in order just to tear down, but in order to lead further into an understanding of what we say. Jesus Christ is Son of God. And that's why the one God is Father.
Wonderful. Thank you for those insights, Father John. And I don't see any further hands up or chat comments. And so we will close off that part of the discussion. And again, thank you so much for joining us. Again, Dr. Behr, we are very grateful.
And we'll
I know it's 10, so it's nearly your time to start writing. So you better
yes, absolutely.
better get at it.
Okay.
Thank you, sir.
Okay, see you, Don. See everybody. Good to be with you all.
I did mean to say before he left, he, along with Lewis Ayres, are our two senior fellows. And one of the things that we can offer that I think is fairly unique is that no, a student cannot come to Hamilton and sit under either of them. But what they have very graciously agreed to is that they every other year they agreed that we can ask them to sit on a dissertation committee. And so they can be part of that process. And so if you can't travel to Durham or Aberdeen, this is one way to connect with them in a not insignificant way. So those are our two senior fellows. Any other questions about anything at all that we have discussed to this point? Just making sure I haven't missed anything in the chats. Thank you, Dr. Fairbairn, for answering that earlier question. Anyone else? Otherwise, oh, Dr. Payton.
Yeah, a question was raised that you sent to me before the meeting began, and I didn't have a chance to speak to it yet. Someone asked about what's going to be offered as classes, courses in the fall next year at MDC. And so the first one, in the first term, there'll be a professional course, MDiv MTS, which graduate students can take at an upper level with different assignments and responsibilities, called Christianity Following the Apostles, meaning both right after them, but then also seeking to be faithful to them. And then the graduate course, second term, will be from Nicaea to Chalcedon, the golden age of patristic literature, where we do look at the controversies regarding the Trinity and the doctrine of Christology as they were articulated and unfolded during that period. So those are the two courses upcoming.
Okay. All right. And we have a question here from Tony. I don't know if you can see that, Dr. Porter. Where did you go? Are you still here? What scholarships or other sources of funding available to those in full-time ministry?
We don't make any distinction between whether you're in full-time ministry or not. So we assign packages of scholarships dependent on any number of things, mostly related to academic achievement, prior performance. As I said, the basis is usually somewhere in the neighborhood of, $5,000 or $6,000 direct bursaries, opportunity of GA-ships, and then there are merit things on top of it. We have competitive prizes every year. And so a student can often get a good chunk of their tuition paid for, depending on grade point average, et cetera.
Okay. Anyone else? If not, I would like to thank everyone for their participation, Dr. Porter, of course, and Peyton for their presentations, and for each of you for joining us. Again, I think all of you have received at least an email or message from me. If you have any questions at all, don't hesitate to reach out, or to our admissions people or anyone else at the college. Thank you so much for joining us, and we look forward to chatting further and exploring ideas together and answering any questions you have. So thank you very much, and take care.
Thanks, Don. Thanks for putting this together.
Thank you.
Thanks all for coming.